Obergefreiter Hans Keller had survived 3 years of war across 2 continents, but nothing prepared him for what he saw through the cargo hold window of the USS General William Mitchell on July 3, 1944. As the transport ship glided past the Virginia coastline toward Norfolk Naval Base, Keller watched something that made him question whether he'd suffered a head injury during his capture at Anzio. Thousands of automobiles streamed along coastal highways in both directions, their chrome surfaces glinting in the afternoon sun like a river of metal flowing endlessly in opposite currents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He pressed his face closer to the glass, ignoring the smell of diesel and unwashed bodies that had filled the hold for 16 days. The cars weren't military vehicles. They were civilian automobiles, each one carrying families, individuals, couples, going about their ordinary lives as if there were no war, no rationing, no sacrifice required. Keller had not seen a privately owned automobile in Germany since 1941, when the Wehrmacht had requisitioned every vehicle with 4 wheels for the war effort. His own father's cherished Opel had been taken by an SS officer who left a receipt stamped with an eagle and swastika, promising compensation after final victory. Beside him, Feldwebel Otto Bergmann squeezed through the crowd of prisoners to glimpse what had captured Keller's attention. Bergmann had commanded an artillery battery that had fired its last shell during the collapse of the Gustav Line, after which his crew had surrendered to American forces rather than face certain death from overwhelming Allied firepower. Now he stared at the procession of civilian vehicles with the expression of a man watching water flow upward. "How many automobiles does this country possess?" Bergmann whispered, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the ship's engines and the conversations of 300 German prisoners packed into the forward hold. Keller had no answer, but he would learn the truth soon enough, and the truth would shatter every assumption he had maintained about American society and its capacity to sustain war. The United States had manufactured over 29 million automobiles between 1900 and 1941, creating not just a transportation system but an entire civilization built around personal mobility. While German cities had been designed for pedestrians and streetcars, American cities sprawled across landscapes connected by ribbons of asphalt that carried individual families in their own steel cocoons. But Keller and Bergmann knew none of this yet. They knew only what their eyes reported, and their eyes reported an impossibility. The USS General William Mitchell had departed from Naples carrying prisoners captured during the Italian campaign, men who had fought under Kesselring's command through the mountains and valleys of central Italy until American artillery, American aircraft, and American supplies had ground down their resistance through sheer relentless pressure. The voyage across the Atlantic had taken longer than expected due to submarine precautions, though by July 1944, the U-boat threat had been largely neutralized by American destroyer escorts and naval aviation. During those 16 days at sea, the German prisoners had been fed 3 meals daily from American naval provisions. Real coffee, not the ersatz mixture of roasted grain and ground acorns that had been standard in the Wehrmacht since 1942. Fresh bread made from white flour, not the increasingly dark and heavy Kriegsbrot the German bakers produced from whatever grain substitutes remained available. Canned meat that actually tasted like meat, accompanied by vegetables that had not been dried or preserved in salt. Lieutenant Wilhelm Braun, a panzer officer whose Tiger tank had been disabled by American fighter bombers near Cassino, kept a mental catalog of every meal served aboard the ship. His training as an engineer gave him a systematic mind that automatically calculated and compared. By the 10th day of the voyage, he had concluded that American prisoners of war were being fed better than German frontline soldiers had eaten since the invasion of Russia. "This is what they feed captives," Braun remarked to anyone who would listen. "Imagine what they feed their own soldiers. Imagine what civilians eat at home." The younger prisoners dismissed his observations as defeatist talk, but the veterans who had served since Poland or France understood the implications. An army that could afford to feed its prisoners with such abundance possessed logistical capabilities beyond anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even during the glory days of Blitzkrieg. Food was not merely sustenance. Food was a weapon, and America wielded it with casual dominance. When the General William Mitchell finally docked at Norfolk, the prisoners were assembled on deck for their first clear view of an American city. The naval base stretched along the waterfront in a confusion of piers, warehouses, cranes, and vessels that made Hamburg's famous harbor seem provincial by comparison. Battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and countless smaller vessels filled every available berth while others waited at anchor in the roads beyond the harbor. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Müller, a veteran of the Afrika Korps who had been captured during the final collapse at Tunis, began counting warships visible from the deck. He reached 47 capital ships before realizing the futility of the exercise. He could see perhaps 1/10 of the harbor from his vantage point, which meant the true number of vessels present exceeded any reasonable estimate. "They build ships faster than we can count them," Mueller said to no one in particular. His voice carried the flat tone of a man stating mathematical facts rather than expressing opinions. The disembarkation process revealed additional layers of American capability that unsettled the German prisoners. Stevedores, many of them African-American civilians, operated cargo cranes with practiced efficiency that would have impressed German military engineers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Forklifts, a technology the Germans had seen only in small numbers, moved pallets of supplies with mechanical precision. Everything was labeled, inventoried, and tracked through systems that appeared to function without the chaos and improvisation that had characterized German logistics since Stalingrad. A young American lieutenant who spoke adequate German supervised the prisoner formation as they prepared to board trains for transport to interior camps. He answered questions with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his country's inevitable victory. "Where are we being taken?" Bergman asked in his careful English, learned from a British tutor before the war. "Camp Shelby, Mississippi," the lieutenant replied. "You'll be assigned to work details once you're processed. We got labor shortages everywhere since our boys shipped overseas. How many prisoners does America hold?" This question came from Brown, whose engineering mind sought to quantify everything. The lieutenant consulted a clipboard. "About 370,000 as of last month. Germans, Italians, few Japanese. Most of you boys will be working farms, logging camps, food processing. We got full employment here, everybody doing something useful." 370,000 prisoners represented more than entire German armies. The number would eventually exceed 500,000 by 1945, but even the current figure staggered comprehension. Where did America house such numbers? How did they feed them? What kind of nation possessed such excess capacity that it could absorb hundreds of thousands of enemy prisoners without apparent strain? The train journey from Norfolk to Mississippi covered over 900 miles through the heart of American agricultural and industrial territory. The prisoners traveled in passenger coaches, not cattle cars. Cushioned seats, clean restrooms, and regular meal stops at station restaurants where German prisoners ate alongside American civilians under guard supervision, but without the hostility or abuse that many had expected. Gefreiter Paul Schneider, a young infantryman from Bavaria who had survived only 4 months on the Italian front before capture, spent the entire journey with his face pressed against the window like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. What he witnessed through that window reconstructed his understanding of national wealth and productive capacity. Farms stretched to the horizon, their fields worked by tractors rather than horses. Schneider's family owned a small farm in Bavaria, where his father and 3 brothers worked their land with 2 draft horses and hand tools, unchanged since his grandfather's time. The tractors he saw from the train window were not rare machines operated by wealthy landowners. They were commonplace implements, as ordinary as the automobiles that seemed to occupy every driveway and roadside. In the Carolinas, the train passed textile mills whose parking lots contained hundreds of worker automobiles. In Georgia, lumber operations processed trees with mechanical efficiency that made German forestry practices seem medieval. In Alabama, steel furnaces glowed against the night sky, their output feeding factories whose production rates Schneider could only imagine. But it was the abundance of electricity that most unsettled him. Every farm had electric lines. Every small town blazed with electric lights. Even tiny crossroads villages possessed electric street lamps that turned night into artificial day. Germany had been rationing electricity since 1942, limiting civilian use to preserve power for war industries. American civilians apparently consumed electricity without restriction, using it for lighting, refrigeration, entertainment, and countless other purposes that seemed frivolous from a German perspective. "They don't know there's a war," Schneider said to the prisoner beside him, an older Lanzer from Saxony who had survived Russia before being shipped to Italy. "They live like it's peacetime." The Saxon veteran, whose name was Friedrich Weber and who had seen things that gave him nightmares whenever he managed to sleep, nodded slowly. "They can afford to live like it's peacetime because they're so rich that war doesn't touch them. Not here, not in their homes. The war is something that happens far away while they keep living their normal lives." This observation contained profound truth that would become increasingly apparent as the prisoners settled into American captivity. The United States was fighting a global war on two fronts simultaneously while maintaining a civilian economy that exceeded German peacetime prosperity. American citizens faced rationing of certain goods like sugar, coffee, and gasoline, but these restrictions were minor inconveniences compared to the desperate shortages that had gripped Germany since the war's beginning. Camp Shelby sprawled across 200 square miles of Mississippi pine forest, a temporary city constructed entirely for the purpose of training American soldiers before they shipped overseas. The prisoner of war compound occupied a section of the larger base, housing German captives in wooden barracks that were identical to facilities occupied by American troops. When Keller and his fellow prisoners from the Norfolk transport arrived at Camp Shelby, they found a prisoner population that had been growing steadily since the first German captives arrived from North Africa in 1943. The established prisoners had already been assigned to work details throughout the region, and they shared information with newcomers about what to expect from American captivity. "The food is better than we ate in the Wehrmacht," explained Unteroffizier Kurt Adler, who had been captured at El Alamein and had spent 18 months in American custody. "The work is hard, but no harder than military service. The Americans are generally decent if you follow rules and don't cause trouble. But the thing that will disturb you most is not how they treat us, it's what you'll learn about their country." Adler's words proved prophetic. Over the following weeks and months, the newly arrived prisoners were assigned to work details that took them throughout Mississippi and neighboring states, placing them in direct contact with American society and American productivity in ways that fundamentally altered their understanding of the war they had lost. Keller was assigned to a lumber operation near Hattiesburg, working alongside American civilian foresters who had been exempted from military service due to the essential nature of their industry. The forestry operation harvested pine trees for construction lumber, paper pulp, and naval stores, feeding industries that consumed wood products at rates that seemed impossible. The cutting operation used power saws that could fell a tree in minutes rather than the hours required by German handsaws. Trucks hauled logs to mills where mechanical processing converted raw timber into finished lumber with minimal human labor. The entire system was designed for maximum efficiency with minimum workers, allowing American industry to maintain production despite having millions of men serving in the military. Werner Schmidt, the civilian foreman who supervised Keller's work detail, was a man in his 50s who had worked in timber his entire adult life. He spoke no German, but he communicated through gestures, demonstrations, and the occasional assistance of a bilingual prisoner who served as informal translator. After 2 weeks of observing Keller's competent work, Schmidt invited him to share lunch, an offer that surprised Keller since he expected American civilians to maintain hostile distance from German prisoners. They sat on logs near the cutting site, eating sandwiches that Schmidt's wife had prepared. The sandwiches contained more meat than Keller had seen in a single meal since before the war. "You're a good worker," Schmidt said through the translator. "Better than some Americans I've hired. Where'd you learn forestry?" My family owns woodland in Hesse, Keller replied. Small holding, maybe 20 hectares. We cut timber for sale and firewood for our own use. Schmidt nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Then he asked a question that opened a conversation Keller would remember for the rest of his life. How much timber does your family harvest in a year? Keller calculated mentally, converting hectares to acres and cubic meters to board feet to match American measurements. Perhaps 1,500 board feet in a good year. Some years less if weather is bad or if we need to let sections regrow. Schmidt absorbed this information while chewing his sandwich. Then he gestured toward the longer operation surrounding them. We'll cut about 15 million board feet this year from this one operation. And this is just one of 47 operations my company runs in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. The numbers made no sense. Keller did the mathematics several times, reaching the same impossible conclusion. This single American lumber company harvested more timber annually than every private forest in his entire region of Germany combined. And this was only one company in one industry in one section of one state. How is this possible? Keller asked, not really expecting an answer that would resolve his confusion. Schmidt shrugged. Lots of trees, good equipment, efficient methods. We waste nothing and produce everything. That's just how we do business in America. That phrase, waste nothing and produce everything, echoed in Keller's mind as he worked through the following weeks. He observed the lumber operation with new attention, noting details that revealed systematic efficiency far beyond what he had understood about American capability. Every log was utilized completely. Premium lumber went to construction. Lower grades went to paper mills. Bark and sawdust went to chemical processing. Nothing was discarded that could serve any productive purpose. This total utilization contrasted sharply with German practices, where much material was simply burned as waste because the infrastructure to process it completely didn't exist. Moreover, the American operation was fully mechanized in ways that multiplied worker productivity far beyond anything possible with German methods. A single American worker operating a power saw could accomplish what required 3 German workers with hand tools. A truck driver could haul loads that would require 4 horse-drawn wagons in Germany. Every aspect of the operation was designed to maximize output per worker, enabling American industry to achieve production levels that seemed mathematically impossible. Meanwhile, Bergman had been assigned to an agricultural work detail on a cotton plantation near Meridian, where he experienced American farming methods that redefined his understanding of agricultural productivity. The plantation covered 3,000 acres, worked by a combination of tenant farmers, seasonal laborers, and German prisoner work crews. The scale alone exceeded anything Bergman had encountered in Germany, where farms were typically small family operations of perhaps 50 to 100 acres. But scale was only part of the revelation. The plantation operated with mechanical efficiency that transformed farming from traditional agriculture into industrial production. Tractors pulled multi-row planters that could seed entire fields in hours rather than the days required by German methods. Mechanical cotton pickers harvested crops at rates that would require dozens of hand laborers. Crop-dusting aircraft sprayed pesticides and fertilizers from the air, treating vast acreages in single flights. The plantation owner, a man named James Whitfield, whose family had worked this land for 3 generations, occasionally visited the work sites to inspect operations. He spoke with Bergman through an interpreter, asking questions about German agriculture with genuine curiosity. "How many acres does a typical German farm work?" Whitfield asked during one of these conversations. 50 acres would be considered a substantial family farm, Bergman replied. Most are smaller. 20 or 30 acres worked by family members with perhaps seasonal help during harvest. Whitfield absorbed this information with visible surprise. 50 acres? That's a garden, not a farm. We got individual fields here bigger than that. How do you feed your country with such small operations? The question struck Bergman with uncomfortable force. How did Germany feed itself? The answer was that Germany couldn't feed itself. Not without imports and not without conquered territories providing supplemental grain. Even before the war, Germany had imported significant food supplies. During the war, the Reich had relied on occupied Ukraine, Poland, and France to supplement domestic production. We import food, Bergman admitted, or we did before the war. During the war, we relied on occupied territories. Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. We export food. Last year, we shipped millions of tons of grain to Britain, Russia, and our own forces overseas. Still had surplus for domestic consumption. American agriculture produces more than Americans can eat. This casual statement revealed capabilities that Bergman found difficult to accept. America exported food to allies while fighting a global war while maintaining civilian abundance that exceeded German peacetime conditions. The agricultural surplus alone represented national wealth beyond anything European countries had achieved. But it was the mechanization that most impressed Bergman. The cotton picker that harvested fields in hours would have cost more than a typical German farmer earned in 5 years. Yet, American farmers purchased such equipment routinely, financing it through bank loans that presumed continued prosperity and stable markets. German farmers could never assume such stability or afford such investment. American farming is not agriculture as we understand it, Bergman wrote in a letter to his wife that American censors would read and approve before mailing. American farming is industrial production applied to crops and livestock. They approach food the same way they approach automobiles or airplanes, as products to be manufactured efficiently in large quantities. This industrial approach to agriculture was supported by research institutions that continuously developed improved seeds, better fertilizers, more effective pesticides, and enhanced growing techniques. American agricultural colleges conducted scientific research that was immediately applied to farming practices, creating continuous productivity improvements that compounded over time. German agriculture, while competent and traditional, operated with methods largely unchanged since the 19th century. German farmers relied on experience and custom rather than scientific research and mechanical innovation. The productivity difference was dramatic, and the difference explained why America could feed itself and much of the Allied world while Germany struggled with rationing and shortages despite controlling territories from France to Ukraine. Braun, the panzer officer with an engineering background, received an assignment that provided unique insight into American industrial capability. He was sent to work at a shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi, where Liberty ships were being constructed for the American Merchant Marine. His technical training enabled him to understand what he witnessed in ways that most prisoners could not fully comprehend. The Pascagoula shipyard had been constructed specifically for war production, transforming a small Gulf Coast town into a major industrial center within 2 years. The yard employed over 10,000 workers operating in 3 shifts around the clock, producing cargo vessels at rates that exceeded the construction capability of Germany's entire shipbuilding industry. Braun's assignment placed him on a welding crew that fabricated hull sections for assembly into complete ships. The modular construction method allowed different sections to be built simultaneously, then joined together in final assembly that took days rather than the months required for traditional ship construction. This revolutionary approach to shipbuilding enabled American yards to complete vessels faster than German U-boats could sink them, a production race that Germany had lost before understanding the contest had begun. The welding technique itself revealed American technological advantages. Electric arc welding had largely replaced riveting in American shipbuilding, creating stronger joins with less labor and faster completion. German shipyards still relied primarily on riveting, which required skilled workers and consumed enormous time. More significantly, the American shipyard operated as part of an integrated industrial network that supplied materials, components, and finished systems from sources throughout the country. Steel arrived from mills in Pennsylvania and Alabama. Engines came from manufacturers in New Jersey and Michigan. Electronics were supplied by companies in Massachusetts and California. The shipyard assembled components manufactured by hundreds of separate suppliers into finished vessels that entered service within weeks of completion. This distributed manufacturing system provided resilience and efficiency impossible with German methods. When Allied bombing damaged a German industrial facility, production stopped until repairs were completed. American industry operated through networks where alternative suppliers could provide replacement components if any single source was disrupted. The system was designed for reliability through redundancy rather than efficiency through centralization. Braun discussed these observations with other prisoners who had technical backgrounds, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. The conversations often occurred during evening hours when prisoners gathered in barracks to share experiences and process the cognitive dissonance between their expectations and their reality. They don't build ships, Braun concluded after several weeks at the shipyard. They manufacture ships using industrial methods developed for automobiles and appliances. The ship is just another product to be assembled from standardized components. This industrial philosophy extended beyond shipbuilding into every aspect of American war production, creating military capabilities that overwhelmed Axis resistance through sheer material superiority. German forces might achieve tactical excellence and operational brilliance, but strategy ultimately depended on resources, and America possessed resources in quantities that made German efforts seem futile regardless of skill or courage. Mueller, the Africa Corps veteran who had counted warships in Norfolk Harbor, found himself assigned to work at a food processing facility in Jackson, Mississippi, where his experience took an unexpected turn. The facility canned vegetables, fruits, and meats for both military and civilian consumption, operating at production scales that transformed his understanding of food supply logistics. The canning operation processed tomatoes at a rate of 12 tons per hour during peak season. Conveyor systems moved produce through washing, sorting, cutting, cooking, and canning stages with minimal human intervention. Workers monitored equipment and performed quality control rather than manually processing each item. The mechanization enabled the facility to employ 200 workers to accomplish what would require 2,000 workers using traditional methods. But the production volume was only part of the revelation. The facility operated under food safety standards that exceeded anything Mueller had encountered in German military or civilian food processing. Every batch was tested for contamination. Every can was inspected for proper sealing. Temperature and processing times were carefully monitored and recorded to ensure product safety and longevity. American civilians demand safe food, explained the plant manager, a woman named Dorothy Henderson, whose husband served with the Army in Europe. We can't sell products that might make people sick. They won't buy from us again, and we'll be out of business. Quality is not optional in America. Quality is required. The concept of consumer choice driving quality standards was foreign to Mueller's experience. German food processing was controlled by government agencies that established minimum standards based on availability rather than consumer preference. If food was available, people bought it regardless of quality, because alternatives didn't exist. American food processors competed for consumer loyalty by providing superior products, creating market pressure for continuous improvement. Henderson took an interest in Mueller's background and sometimes engaged him in conversations during breaks. She was curious about Germany and asked questions that revealed how little Americans understood about European conditions. "Did German women work in factories before the war?" she asked one afternoon while they sat in the facility break room. "Some did," Mueller replied, "but most women worked in homes or small shops. Factory work was considered men's work, except in textile industries." Henderson shook her head with evident disapproval. "That's wasteful. Women can do most jobs as well as men if they're trained properly. Look around this facility. More than half my workers are women, and they're just as productive as men. Some are more productive because they pay better attention to detail." This observation aligned with what Mueller had witnessed. American women worked throughout the food processing facility, operating machinery, supervising production lines, and managing logistics with competence that would have shocked German industrial managers who believed women were unsuited for such responsibilities. The American mobilization of female labor represented a strategic advantage that Germany had failed to exploit. While German women were encouraged to remain in domestic roles to preserve traditional family structures, American women had entered the workforce in millions, replacing men who had joined the military while maintaining industrial production at levels that exceeded peacetime output. Moreover, American women workers were paid wages that enabled them to purchase consumer goods and support families, creating economic circulation that sustained domestic prosperity even during wartime. German women who did work in war industries were often paid subsistence wages that barely covered necessities, creating economic stagnation rather than circulation. The food processing facility where Mueller worked supplied both military contracts and civilian markets simultaneously, demonstrating American productive capacity that could serve multiple demands without choosing between them. German industry had been forced to prioritize military production at the expense of civilian needs, creating shortages that undermined morale and reduced worker productivity through malnutrition and deprivation. Schneider, the young Bavarian soldier who had watched America from train windows, received an assignment that exposed him to American retail commerce in ways he found almost incomprehensible. He was assigned to work at a warehouse that supplied grocery stores throughout central Mississippi, loading and unloading trucks that distributed food products to civilian retailers. The warehouse contained more food than Schneider had seen in his entire life. Aisles stretched hundreds of feet, lined with pallets stacked high with canned goods, boxed cereals, bagged flour, sugar, coffee, and countless other products. Refrigerated sections held meats, dairy products, and frozen foods. The sheer abundance overwhelmed any attempt to inventory or comprehend the quantity. Carl Foster, the warehouse manager who supervised the prisoner work crews, noticed Schneider's stunned expression during the first tour of the facility. He smiled with evident amusement at the young German's reaction. "First time seeing an American grocery warehouse?" Foster asked through the interpreter. Schneider nodded, unable to articulate his thoughts in English. "This is just one warehouse serving stores in a 50-mile radius," Foster explained. "We got warehouses like this in every region of every state, all of them full of food all the time. Americans expect to walk into any grocery store and find whatever they want whenever they want it. If stores run out of products, customers shop somewhere else, and stores go out of business." The logistics required to maintain such abundance staggered Schneider's comprehension. Trucks arrived daily from canneries, bakeries, dairies, meat packers, and produce distributors. Each delivery was inventoried, stored, and redistributed to retail stores based on orders that reflected consumer demand. The entire system operated with commercial efficiency that wasted nothing while ensuring constant availability. German food distribution during the war had been centralized and rationed, with government agencies determining who received what products in what quantities. American food distribution remained market-based even during wartime, with consumers choosing products based on preference and price rather than accepting whatever government rations provided. The difference was not merely economic but philosophical. American society trusted individual choice and market mechanisms to distribute resources efficiently. German society relied on centralized planning and authoritarian control to manage scarcity. The American approach required abundance to function, but it also created incentives for producing abundance through competition and innovation. Schneider worked in the warehouse for 6 months, loading trucks and moving pallets with other prisoners while observing the flow of goods that sustained American civilian life. He saw seasonal variations in product availability but never saw actual shortages. When one product became scarce, alternatives appeared to fill the gap. The system was flexible and responsive in ways that centralized planning could never match. During lunch breaks, Schneider sometimes talked with American truck drivers who delivered goods to the warehouse. These men drove routes that covered hundreds of miles, carrying products from manufacturers to distribution centers like the one where Schneider worked. Their trucks were modern, well-maintained, and supplied with fuel that apparently never ran short despite rationing. One driver, a man named Bobby Tate, who had been exempted from military service due to a childhood injury that left him with a pronounced limp, became friendly with Schneider and practiced his limited German while Schneider practiced his improving English. "You miss Germany?" Tate asked one day while they shared sandwiches in the warehouse break area. "I miss my family," Schneider replied carefully. "I miss my home, but I do not miss being hungry or cold or afraid." Tate nodded sympathetically. "War is hell, I reckon. My cousin is over there fighting, maybe fighting Germans like you used to be. Hope he comes home safe." This personal connection reminded Schneider that individual Americans were not abstractions, but people with families and concerns similar to his own. The realization complicated his feelings about captivity and about the war that had brought him to this strange land of impossible abundance. Weber, the Russian front veteran who had observed American civilian life from train windows, was assigned to work at a construction site in Biloxi, Mississippi, where a new military training facility was being built to prepare soldiers for Pacific combat. The construction project revealed American building methods that achieved completion speeds impossible with German techniques. The construction crew used prefabricated components manufactured off-site and assembled rapidly on location. Wall sections arrived complete with windows and doors already installed. Roof trusses were fabricated in workshops and lifted into place by cranes. Plumbing and electrical systems were pre-assembled and installed as units rather than being constructed piece by piece. "American construction is like assembling children's blocks," Weber observed to another prisoner working the same site. "Everything is made to fit together quickly with minimum skill required. German construction is like sculpture, beautiful but slow." The construction foreman, a man named Mike Sullivan, whose 3 sons all served in the military, overheard this comment through the interpreter and laughed with genuine amusement. "You're exactly right," Sullivan said. "We don't have time for beautiful, we need functional and fast. This facility needs to be training soldiers in 3 months. German methods would take 2 years to build the same facility, and the war would be over before it was finished." Sullivan's observation contains strategic truth that Weber recognized immediately. American construction methods were designed for speed and scale rather than permanence and beauty. The training facility being built would serve its purpose during the war and could be demolished or repurposed afterward without regret. German construction aspired to permanence, creating buildings meant to last for generations, but requiring time and resources that limited how much could be built. The construction site employed both civilian workers and prisoner labor crews, providing Weber with opportunities to observe American workers at close range. What he saw challenged his assumptions about worker motivation and productivity. American construction workers were not driven by fear or coercion. They worked for wages that enabled them to support families and purchase consumer goods. They took pride in their skills and competed informally to demonstrate competence. They cooperated with each other because cooperation enabled everyone to earn more through faster completion and additional contracts. This voluntary cooperation contrasted sharply with German labor practices where workers followed orders from supervisors who controlled their employment and their fate. American workers negotiated with employers, changed jobs if they found better opportunities, and organized unions to advocate for their interests. The entire system was based on voluntary exchange rather than hierarchical control. Moreover, American workers were remarkably well equipped with tools and safety equipment that German workers rarely possessed. Every worker had multiple specialized tools appropriate for their tasks. Safety equipment, including hard hats, gloves, and protective eyewear, was provided by employers and required to be worn. Accidents were investigated and analyzed to prevent recurrence rather than being accepted as inevitable costs of construction work. The value placed on worker safety revealed cultural attitudes that Weber found both admirable and puzzling. American employers protected workers because injured workers were expensive to replace and because workplace injuries could result in lawsuits that cost companies substantial money. German employers had no such incentives because injured workers were simply replaced with new workers who were grateful for employment. Weber worked on the construction site for 8 months, participating in the completion of the training facility and the beginning of a second project to expand the base. During this time, he observed American military training methods that revealed additional advantages beyond industrial capacity. The training facility prepared soldiers for jungle warfare in the Pacific Theater using realistic simulations that included live ammunition, smoke, explosives, and confusion deliberately created to approximate combat conditions. The training was intensive, systematic, and designed to prepare ordinary civilians to function effectively in combat within months rather than the years traditionally required to create competent soldiers. German military training had emphasized discipline, obedience, and traditional military virtues that required extensive time to instill. American military training emphasized practical skills, problem-solving, and adaptability that could be taught quickly to motivated individuals. The difference reflected broader cultural attitudes about authority and individual initiative. German soldiers were expected to follow orders without question, relying on superior officers to make decisions and provide direction. American soldiers were expected to take initiative when circumstances required, making decisions based on training and common sense rather than waiting for orders from absent commanders. This difference in military philosophy was supported by educational differences. German soldiers often came from backgrounds where they had limited education and were not encouraged to think independently. American soldiers came from educational systems that emphasized critical thinking and problem-solving, preparing them to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Adler, the Unteroffizier who had been captured at El Alamein and had been in American custody longer than most prisoners, was assigned to work at a railroad switching yard in Hattiesburg, where he witnessed American transportation logistics that explained how the country moved supplies and personnel across continental distances. The switching yard operated continuously, sorting freight cars into trains bound for destinations throughout the country. Locomotives pulled strings of cars into the yard where they were uncoupled, resorted according to destination, and coupled into new trains that departed for their assigned routes. The process operated with mechanical precision that minimized delays and maximized throughput. American railroads operated under private ownership with government coordination, creating competition that drove efficiency while maintaining national integration. German railroads were state-owned monopolies that operated according to bureaucratic procedures rather than market pressures. The difference in performance was dramatic. American freight trains moved supplies from manufacturers to military depots, from farms to cities, from ports to interior destinations without the delays and confusion that plagued German logistics. The railroad system was fully integrated with trucking companies that provided final delivery to locations not served by rail lines, creating seamless transportation networks that moved goods efficiently from any origin to any destination. Moreover, American railroads operated with equipment that was standardized and interchangeable. Freight cars from different railroad companies could be coupled together and moved across the country without compatibility issues. Locomotives were powerful and reliable, capable of pulling heavy loads across long distances without the frequent breakdowns that plagued German equipment. The railroad workforce included significant numbers of African American workers who performed maintenance, loading, and operation tasks with competence that challenged German racial theories about inherent capabilities. Adler, like most German soldiers, had been indoctrinated with Nazi ideology that classified people by race and assigned capabilities accordingly. Working alongside African Americans who demonstrated obvious competence created cognitive dissonance that forced reconsideration of assumptions. One evening, Adler shared his observations with other long-term prisoners who had experienced similar revelations. The conversation took place in a barracks after work hours, when prisoners gathered to talk, play cards, or write letters home. "Everything we were told about America was wrong," Adler said quietly, aware that such statements could be considered defeatist or treasonous even among prisoners. "We were told Americans were weak, corrupt, and incapable of sustained effort. What we've seen proves the opposite. Americans are strong, organized, and relentlessly efficient." Another prisoner, a Feldwebel named Gustav Klein, who had served in Russia before being transferred to Italy, nodded slowly. "We were told that American industry was hollow, that their wealth was illusion built on credit and speculation. But we've seen their factories, their farms, their warehouses. The wealth is real, the production is real. Everything is real, and it's all bigger than we were told was possible." A younger prisoner, barely 20 years old, who still maintained fierce loyalty to Nazi socialist ideology, objected strenuously. "You sound like defeatists. Germany will still win through superior will and superior fighting spirit. Material advantages don't determine victory. Adler responded with the patience of experience. I believed that once. I believed courage and determination would overcome any material disadvantage. Then I fought in Africa and watched our tanks run out of fuel while British tanks kept coming. I watched our artillery run out of shells while British artillery never stopped firing. I watched our supply convoys get destroyed by aircraft while British convoys arrived safely. Material advantages do determine victory when the material gap is this large. The younger prisoner had no effective response to this logic, but his expression showed he was not convinced. Some prisoners would never accept the evidence before their eyes because accepting it meant acknowledging that their sacrifices had been futile and their cause had been hopeless from the beginning. As months passed and prisoners were rotated through different work assignments, patterns emerged that revealed the systematic nature of American advantages. Every industry operated with similar principles of efficiency, standardization, and mechanization. Every region of the country displayed similar abundance and productive capacity. The advantages were not limited to specific locations or industries, but represented fundamental characteristics of American society. Keller, after completing his assignment at the lumber operation, was transferred to work at an automotive assembly plant in Detroit that had been converted to produce military vehicles. The facility operated with assembly line methods that Henry Ford had pioneered decades earlier, creating production rates that exceeded anything possible with traditional manufacturing. The assembly line moved continuously, carrying partially completed vehicles past workstations where employees performed specialized tasks before the vehicle moved to the next station. Each worker repeated the same operations hundreds of times per day, achieving speed and precision through repetition and specialization. The system required minimal skill for individual tasks, but achieved enormous productivity through systematic organization. Keller worked on a team that installed electrical systems into military trucks. His task involved connecting specific wires according to a diagram, a job he learned to perform competently within hours. The simplicity of individual tasks enabled the facility to employ workers with limited training, many of them women who had never worked in manufacturing before the war. The production supervisor, a man named Frank Morrison who had worked for Ford for 20 years, explained the philosophy behind the assembly line during a brief conversation with Keller through an interpreter. "We don't need craftsmen," Morrison said. "We need workers who can follow instructions and perform simple tasks reliably. The intelligence is built into the system, not required from individual workers. This allows us to hire anyone and train them quickly to be productive." This industrial philosophy was the opposite of German manufacturing traditions that emphasized skilled craftsmen who understood entire production processes. German factories employed workers who had completed apprenticeships lasting years, creating expertise that was valuable but limited in quantity. American factories employed workers who could be trained in days, creating labor pools that could expand or contract based on production needs. The automotive assembly plant where Keller worked produced military trucks at a rate of one vehicle every 3 minutes. This production rate seemed impossible until he witnessed it day after day, vehicle after vehicle rolling off the line in an endless stream of olive-drab steel. During breaks, Keller sometimes talked with American workers who were curious about Germany and about the war. Most were sympathetic to his situation as a prisoner, but firm in their belief that America was fighting a just war against tyranny. These conversations revealed how differently Americans and Germans understood the conflict. Americans believed they were fighting to defend freedom and democracy against totalitarian aggression. Germans had believed they were fighting to defend their nation against encirclement and economic strangulation by hostile powers. The two narratives were incompatible, and neither side could fully comprehend the other's perspective. But regardless of ideological differences, the material facts were undeniable. America possessed industrial capacity that enabled it to produce weapons, vehicles, aircraft, and ships in quantities that overwhelmed Axis resistance. The production was not temporary or unsustainable, but represented normal operation of industrial systems designed for efficiency and scale. By late 1944, as Allied forces advanced across France and Germany faced inevitable defeat, the German prisoners in American camps began to understand that they were witnessing not just American abundance, but the future of industrial civilization. The methods they observed would eventually spread to other countries, including a rebuilt Germany that would adopt American techniques to achieve post-war prosperity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.